Last week, something big dropped in BC forestry. A technical review, quietly commissioned by several First Nations and never meant for public release, has surfaced. It's a 572-page deep dive by a registered professional forester and a forest ecologist, and what it reveals is staggering. The BC government has been claiming that there are far more trees on the land base than actually exist. The authors say the province's methods for estimating timber aren't just off, they're built on assumptions so unrealistic they undermine the long term health of the forest itself. In a Times Colonist article, co author Dave Rotties put it bluntly: there's a strong likelihood that throughout the province, we're cutting almost at twice the rate of what is considered sustainable. We're running out of wood. And while the report focuses on the Mackenzie timber supply area, a massive region stretching across the Rockies and the Peace River region, the implications don't stop there, because the modeling system that produced these inflated numbers isn't unique to Mackenzie. It's the same modeling framework used in every timber supply area in British Columbia. So if the numbers are wrong in Mackenzie, they're almost certainly wrong everywhere else. That is the bombshell. If you're following this channel, in our mill closures video, companies kept saying they're shutting mills because of a lack of economically viable fibre. And now we know why. The government numbers counted trees that don't exist. The main takeaway from the Mackenzie report is simple. Government timber estimates are built on unrealistic assumptions, and the available harvest is massively overestimated. So I'll summarize it first, and then I'll go into more detail. The government has been overestimating merchantable timber by counting stands that are too small to harvest economically, counting stands that don't exist on the ground, relying on old, inaccurate forest inventories, and assuming growth rates that don't match reality. Before I go further, a quick reminder. What is the allowable annual cut, the AAC? It's the yearly logging quota the BC government sets for each region. It determines how much wood companies are allowed to cut. The AAC is only as accurate as the data behind it. If the data is inflated, the AAC is inflated. And according to this report, and another one from 2018, the underlying data is often outdated, inflated, or just wrong. This means the AAC is not a scientific measure of forest capacity. It's a political quota built on the ministry's assumptions. Before I walk through 9 of the findings, quick warning. This is the dense part, but this is also where the entire system falls apart. So stick with it. The Mackenzie AAC is likely about twice what the land can actually sustain. The model was built around keeping the cut high in the short term. The base case isn't a real measure of long-term sustainable logging. It's built to keep harvest levels steady, so it uses unrealistic assumptions, such as very little future wildfire, overly optimistic tree growth, no drought mortality, no beetle resurgence, and treating hard-to-reach areas as if they're easy to log. This is where the model starts breaking. Number 2, the AAC relies heavily on future plantations that don't exist yet. The forecast counts plantation productivity as if it's guaranteed, even though regeneration failures exist. I've seen a lot of them. Climate stress is rising. It's hotter and drier all across BC. Plantation yields are uncertain, and real-world volumes are often lower than predicted. This creates phantom fibre. Number 3, the inventory itself is inflated. Therefore, the starting numbers are wrong. The report repeatedly flags that the VRI overestimates stand volumes. Every forecast built on that inflated inventory is too optimistic. Number 4, the province used the most optimistic growth curves, not realistic ones. So the measured plot data, that's the data on the ground, contradicts the curve projections, and the ministry didn't correct it. Number 5, long-term sustainable yield wasn't actually evaluated. They looked at short-term flows that preserve status quo, not at true ecological limits. Think about that. It's like setting fish quotas without checking if there are any fish in the lake. Number 6, the province tried to push cumulative effects off the chief forester's plate. The minister's letter tells the chief forester to ignore cumulative effects on caribou, grizzly, old growth, etc. Number 7, this AAC will deepen socioeconomic instability in Mackenzie. Inflated AAC creates short-term stability, but leads to harsh crashes later. Ecology will impose the real limit eventually. The only question is whether communities get time to adapt. Number 8, the problem isn't just Mackenzie. Legislation itself favors overcutting. Section 8 of the Ministry of Forest and Range Act and Section 8.8 of the Forest Act push short-term economic objectives over ecological reality. There's still no legal definition of sustainability. And finally, number 9, authors recommend a province-wide independent review of timber supply sustainability. They call for Indigenous leadership and for future AACs to use base cases grounded in reality, not optimistic modeling. BC is essentially running blind, setting harvest levels without adequate evidence. A report by Watts and Anthony Britneff, a former Ministry of Forest staffer, said the exact same thing years ago. Outdated inventories, unverifiable yield models, and sensitivity analyses too weak to catch errors. And if this all sounds abstract, here's the part that matters. This isn't a one-off mistake. We've already lived through the same pattern in the boundary region, and the consequences were catastrophic. This leaked report matches exactly what we found in the boundary timber supply area. In 2018, Britneff and Watts found the AAC was miscalculated and likely set too high. Boundaries Forest Inventory relied partly on aerial photos from 1954 to 2009, before many major fires, beetle damage, and years of industrial clearcutting. The data for Tree Farm License 8 and boundary inventory was outdated and unreliable. There was no field confirmation of predicted stand volumes, and predicted volumes were inflated by 15 to 30%. That was in 2018. No one listened. And the last AAC for the boundary was 2013-2014. And the review that was supposed to happen in 2024 didn't happen, and it's been delayed. Massive contiguous clear cuts proved the overcutting. There are cut blocks in the boundary up to 4 kilometers across. Thousands of hectares have been removed at high elevations, and hydrology has been hammered. The consequences arrived. Boundary didn't just lose forest cover, we lost protection. And the result? The most catastrophic flood in BC history. 400 homes hit, 300 businesses damaged, and $165 million plus in costs. All while government blamed climate change and ignored the obvious. Overcut landscapes magnify flood risk. When your forest is overcut, your hydrology breaks. When hydrology breaks, towns flood. It's not politics, that's math. This isn't a boundary problem or a Mackenzie problem or a caribou problem. This is a provincial system failure. Because the timber supply model inflates the numbers, the AAC inflates the numbers, and government keeps approving the inflated numbers. In 2020, Britneff and Watts showed the same pattern province-wide. AAC determinations routinely ignore cumulative effects, rely on weak monitoring, dismiss climate uncertainty, and everybody who lives in BC and has lived there for decades knows how much hotter and drier it is across the province now. And the AAC determinations also use analyses too weak to catch errors. The system wasn't designed to protect communities. It was designed to keep volume moving. And now the volume is gone. And another major report, closer to the brink, shows BC has already degraded or deforested 18 million hectares and is targeting what's left of the highest productivity forests. The remaining forest isn't just smaller, it's weaker and less able to support AAC assumptions. At this point, you might be tempted to argue, who cares what the AAC is? Companies aren't cutting that much anyway. True. The AAC was around 60 million cubic meters, and the actual cut was about 40 million in 2023. But that gap isn't proof the AAC is fine, it's proof the AAC is fantasy. Companies aren't cutting to the quota because the wood the province claims is merchantable isn't actually there on the ground or worth logging. So if mills are closing and the cut keeps dropping while the AAC stays high, then the model is counting timber that doesn't exist. In our last video, companies said mills are shutting because there's a lack of economically viable timber. Now it all lines up. The AAC said the wood was there. The actual forest said otherwise. You can't cut imaginary timber. You can't run mills on inflated numbers. You can't base a regional economy on a fantasy spreadsheet. Here's the bottom line. BC has harvested based on overestimates. Those overestimates are now showing up as mill shutdowns, land degradation, community disasters. If we keep the same legislation and the same modeling, we repeat the cycle. Inflated AAC, overcutting, collapse, blame the market, close mills, and the companies move on to Georgia, where rotations are 25 years and the labor is that much cheaper. That's why we're pushing the new Forest Act, because this isn't theoretical, we've lived it. And now the leaked Mackenzie report confirms it. BC needs a forestry system based on reality, not invented numbers, based on hydrology, not volume, based on communities and ecosystems, not quotas. The truth is finally breaking through. And here on this channel, we'll keep covering it. BC cannot keep setting policy on imaginary timber. If you want a system based on hydrology, ecology, and truth, not inflated spreadsheets, please support our work.